Hello everyone. When I started writing point number 6, I learned I actually left out a little bit of point number 5. So this video is going to add in what I missed the first time.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, let's move on to another evidence that I found very, very interesting, something that I really didn't strongly consider before watching this amazing movie.
0 for 4 so far. Let's see what number 5 is. Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Today we're looking at proof number 5 of the 7 proofs that the global flood was a real thing. So far, Dr. Dan Biddle and Allan Parr have failed completely to prove that the global flood was real. Let's see if point number 5 can do it.
In the movie, you all talk about the post-flood lifespan decay.
Well, this is faith evidence, not scientific evidence. In order for it to be scientific evidence, there would have to be proof that people lived for much longer in the past. In fact, the opposite seems true to me. People live much longer in modern times because of more scientific knowledge and better medicine. Children are not dying during childbirth, which is why the average age of people is much higher than it was in the past. There's less infant death, and senior citizens are leading productive lives well into their 90s. I could stop this video now and not even bother watching the rest of it, but I'll keep going, just in case there's a viewer that's questioning the flood, just like I did years ago.
You talk about before the flood, clearly, according to the biblical account, people were living 600 years, 700 years, 800 years, Methuselah, 900 and I think 69 years or something like that.
Just maybe the ages are symbolic. A lot of ancient Near Eastern cultures did this. In fact, some of them recorded their kings as reigning for 30,000 years. Do you think that people lived for 30,000 years? At what point do you start to question whether it's a historical account? Is it when Methuselah lives for 3,000 years instead?
After the flood, we see this exponential decay of lifespan happening where people are not living that long.
Stories about people change. Later in the Bible, it's an actual historical record, so the ages are going to be more accurate compared to people that may be real and may be mythological. Just because something is a myth doesn't mean we can't learn something important from it. Lord of the Rings is a myth, but it has very important lessons about bravery and redemption and friendship.
Talk to me about why and how does that give any evidence at all to a flood happening?
It doesn't. Now, I'm quite certain they're going to talk about vapor canopies and O2 levels and Adam being genetically perfect, whatever that means. None of this is supported by science or can even be considered science. As I said before, science observes a problem, gathers evidence, forms a hypothesis, and then tests it. Young Earth creationism decides something is true first and then either tries to gather evidence to prove it or just makes things up. The only reason they believe this is because they first decided all of Genesis is historical, and then they reject anything that might contradict that. And if you don't believe me, go to the Answers in Genesis website.
You guys, it's incredible that we're living in the day and age that we are right now because we've figured it out.
You figured out what? You're reading a story in English with the lens of a modern culture. The story was written in the ancient Near Eastern culture in ancient Hebrew, a language of very, very few words. You just spent 30 minutes or so spouting non-scientific gobbledygook, and you still think you won.
I remember reading the Bible as a kid and just puzzled, bringing up stories. My mom just going, Mom, how in the world do these people live in 700 years, 800 years, 900 years? It doesn't make any sense.
I agree. It doesn't make sense. Probably because they lived normal lives and their ages were inflated for the story because they were important to the Jewish culture.
Before the flood, we see that these patriarchs listed in Genesis lived an average of 912 years. But then after the flood, we have Noah living 950 years, but his son only lived 600 years. And then we have Peleg living 200 and some years. And then we've got Abraham living 175, and then Moses living 120 years. So they didn't just all of a sudden go from living 900 years down to 70 like we see today. It follows along a pattern that exponentially declines.
I really wish these people would consider alternate viewpoints. John Walton explains it quite well in his Lost World series. I'll put a link in the description. He can say it much better than I ever can.
Well, we now know exactly why that happened. It's called a biological decay curve.
And what science is there that supports this? I'm guessing only young earth creation science.
So when you take all of humanity and bottleneck us down to just 8 people, then they get off the ark after the 1-year-long flood, and they start interbreeding amongst themselves.
If all of humanity was reduced to 8 people, 2 of which were never recorded as having more children, the resulting genetic deformity would probably end all of humanity.
And their mutations exponentially increase. And as the mutations in our gene pool exponentially increase, so does our lifespan exponentially decreases.
If all of these mutations are the result of inbreeding, then possibly it's more likely that people have deformities and stop being able to reproduce, like the Habsburgs. This is showing another problem with young earth creationist viewpoints, the idea that all mutations are bad. They're not. Most of them are neutral. Some of them are beneficial. Examples: blue eyes and the ability to digest milk later in childhood and into adulthood. Harmful mutations are weeded out by natural selection. Once again, young earth creationism is inventing things to support their narrative.
It doesn't fall off a shelf, but it gets slower and slower and slower, and it goes down along that predictable line to the point where you look at the data over that 2,000 year span of lifespans, and it's uncanny. It's scientific evidence right in the Bible.
What's scientific about it? There's no evidence that people 6,000 years ago lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. What we have is an ancient Jewish story assigning long ages to people for a theological reason. It was common in A&E culture, and many other people did the same thing. You can write off Sumerian kings living for 30,000 years, but you have to hold on to people living for 900. I'll say it again. Ignoring the cultural significance of the writing is doing a very big disservice to the ancient writers.
That mutations increased exponentially, and so our lifespans decreased exponentially.
Go find 8 people, put them on an island, and tell them to reproduce, and see how well they do. Why did this genetic perfection last for 2,000 years or more, and only stop right after the flood? What evidence outside of the Bible can you point to that this is possible? What exactly even is genetic perfection? Young earth creationism is so big on observation and testing. So what experiment can you design in order to test this theory, this hypothesis, and prove it? I will admit, as a former young earth creationist, I did actually believe in this for a point, but then I learned a little bit more about science.
Before the flood, all sorts of people on the earth, and so therefore the genetic mutations were acting as normal, and so therefore it made sense that people were living 700-800, an average of 912 years. But as you condense all of humanity into only 8 people, the genetic mutations there are obviously skewed, and so therefore it affected the lifespan of people. But
nothing about a wide gene pool allows people to live for almost 1,000 years. It just keeps inbreeding from taking over and causing harmful genetic mutations that eventually lead to people not being able to reproduce. In order for Noah's sons and wives to repopulate the earth, They would have to have the same genetic perfection that you claim Adam and Eve had. What are the odds that 6 people find each other and they're all close to being genetically perfect? Noah's Ark was probably the last mythical story I let go of after leaving young earth creationism. There is nothing scientific about the claims in this section of the video. It is all just pseudoscience.
But over a period of time, you see this decay, which would point back to something happening, right? Something happened at this moment in history.
Yes, what happened is they stopped writing mythology and started recording people's day-to-day lives. It was more historical. That's why after Genesis 11, people start living a more normal lifespan.
You also mentioned a couple other things like nutrient access and oxygen density. Talk a little bit about how that would impact a decreased lifespan, and why would we have those couple of things after a flood?
Well, this will be interesting. According to actual history, humans lived by hunting and gathering until the agricultural revolution, which happened about 11,700 years ago. Being able to settle down, live in houses, and grow food seems like it would increase the lifespan of people, not decrease it. Arguing that pre-flood people had more access to food than post-flood people is very interesting, considering that God cursed the ground and told Adam that he would have great difficulty in growing food. Some young earth creationists also believe in a water canopy that surrounded the earth, which would give humanity and animals more oxygen. Let's read the verse from Genesis. Genesis 1:6. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. There was evening, there was morning, the second day." This canopy apparently also kept out harmful solar radiation, which would lead to less mutations in people and allow them to live longer lives. Remember, to young earth creationists, all mutations are bad. Never mind the scientific impossibility of the earth being surrounded by a vapor canopy and the destruction that would happen to earth as it condensed into rain. All of that could be a video on its own. Let's see what he has to say.
Yes, well, we know that people lived a long time before the flood. We know that the climate was probably very temperate because Adam and Eve didn't need clothes, obviously. They're cruising around. There probably wouldn't have been impassable mountain ranges because God said, "Be fruitful and multiply." And we know it was a tropical paradise because of the coal seams and the oil. I mean, there was lots of vegetation before the flood.
Seriously? It's a very big stretch to claim that there were no very tall mountains because God told Adam to have children. This guy is very good at inventing things to justify his beliefs. If I had this talent, I would never need to look on Google when I was writing scripts for my videos.
And we know it was a tropical paradise because of the coal seams and the oil. I mean, there was lots of vegetation before the flood.
This only works when you think that all coal and oil were made within the last few thousand years. When you have millions and billions of years to make the coal and oil, then it doesn't matter. Nice try. Try again.
And we also know there was gigantism where creatures were living to get really, really large and they were living a long time.
Well, we know that dinosaurs and other reptiles of that time were very big because we found their fossils. Is he claiming that dinosaurs are just reptiles that grew very large because they could live for, say, 300 years? What we know is that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old and has had many different kinds of climates.
After the flood, We have a different environment. We have rainbows that we're seeing for the first time. We have vegetation change. We've got thorns and thistles the ground shall produce for you, because we're still going through the curse. It's a different world that we have now. Before the flood, we've got dinosaurs, for example, the huge sauropods that have nasal passages that are only twice the size of modern day horses, but they weigh 100,000 pounds.
Rainbows are caused by water refracting through water droplets after it rained. Where in all of the Bible does it say it never rained until the flood? If you want to point to Genesis, you should probably read it more carefully. All it says is God hadn't caused it to rain, and that a mist came up from the ground. It never says it never rained after that. So God cursed the ground to make Adam work harder, but he was still nice enough to provide magic water so the crops could grow. According to young earth creationists, all of humanity were vegetarian until after the flood happened. That's a lot of plants to grow, a lot of different types of food and plants, and hope magic water makes it work. This is also not the first time that thorns and thistles grew, even from a young earth creationist viewpoint. They were present ever since God booted Adam and Eve out of the garden as part of the curse. Look at it here. I'm not surprised you got the science wrong, but I am surprised that you're getting the theology wrong, even if you are a young earth creationist.
What about those big flying pterodactyls? Some of them have 50-foot wingspans. How are you going to get a 600-pound creature off the ground with enough lift with today's environment and pressures for that creature to fly? Well, probably couldn't.
Yes, there was a time that oxygen levels were higher. This allowed the dinosaurs and plants to grow very large. The problem is, it happened 80 million years ago, not 6,000. Nothing he is saying is based on science. It's based on him reading an ancient story and making a bunch of assumptions to justify his beliefs in it. Only thing that I know is he's been wrong completely throughout this entire series of videos.
But here's a profound thing. Why in the world would the Bible writers who were transcribing the scripture for thousands of years want to have even written down that those people were living 900 years old?
Because it's oral tradition, not a historical document. It's not a copy of everyone's birth and death certificates. Why would Abraham laugh about having a child at nearly 100 years old, when according to Genesis, his own father had him at 130? He should have said, "No problem, God. My dad and granddad did the same thing."
Wouldn't they be blamed for exaggerating or being fake or writing up this weird document that's talking about these people living 900 years?
If it happened in modern times, then yes, you would have a problem, because people tend to frown upon people lying about their age. When you study the Old Testament in its historical context, well, then no, because people just wrote things down for a different reason than we write things down thousands of years later. I find I'm repeating myself a lot. I think the next time he makes this claim, I'm just going to show a picture of a cute puppy.
They would be, not motivated to write down those lifespans, because everyone in their culture would have said, what kind of book are you talking about? We know that's not true. No one's living to be 200 years or 100 years. So
that's what I've been saying all along.
There's something going on here where they were willing to write down these long lifespans, not even knowing that they were writing these declining lifespans that scientifically now we can analyze fall along what's called an R square, or a 0.95. It's statistically significant, with all of the data points falling along a predicted slope.
Predicted by people that have been proven to lie about science and make things up all the time? Show me somebody studying the data without preconceived notions, and I'll give it some thought. Otherwise, it's just more pseudoscience from the kings of pseudoscience. All right, everyone, we've reached the end of another video. I really hope you like it. You can hit that like and subscribe button and share the video with your friends. There's plenty of other things to watch, so hang out on my channel, and I'll see you later. Well, 0 for 4 some out of these 7 points. People are living longer and not dying in childbirth. People are not dying. There's less infant death, and later in the Bible, it's more